Welcome to CryptOx, Oxford University's crypto society. We create educational content on crypto and blockchain and have quite a large focus on venture capital and the commercial applications of blockchain. And we're delighted to be joined by a very impressive young man called Benyamin Ahmed, who is only 12 years old and has made quite a small personal fortune by selling NFTs. He created a Weird Whales collection and has been featured on very, very big news outlets such as CNBC, the BBC, the Middle East National News, and we're absolutely delighted to have him today. So thank you for joining us, Benjamin and Imran.
Thank you for having me on this talk. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Okay, so we already know a little bit about your background. You're only 12, you're at school, and yet you've already achieved so much at such a young age, and you already have so much technical knowledge in the space. So for people who maybe know a little bit less than you, would you be able to tell us just what is a blockchain?
So a blockchain is a database which is owned by no one and it's always active. It's never not running. It's 24/7. And blockchains are decentralized and can allow us to send money without a middleman, such as a bank. So let's say I wanted to send you £10. I would have to go through a middleman, which is a bank, whereas blockchains, I can do it peer-to-peer, so I can send it directly to you.
And how do NFTs fit into blockchain? What even is an NFT for people who might not know?
So an NFT stands for non-fungible token. Everybody understands the non and the token part, but they struggle with the definition of fungible. So fungible means an item can be replaceable. Money is fungible. If I give you £10 and ask for it back in 2 weeks, you can give me any £10 back. However, if I give you an NFT and ask for it back in 2 weeks, you have to give me that exact NFT back because it's not replaceable.
Okay, so back onto the topic of blockchain, is there anything that particularly interests you about it, and where does it currently have a foothold in terms of, maybe it has a foothold now in the world of currency to an extent, but where does it have a foothold, and then do you think there's any particularly fertile soil that blockchain could be very useful for?
So blockchains are incredible because every transaction is recorded. So I can see that someone sent, let's say, 1 Bitcoin from this address to this address at this time. So all the transactions are public. Think of it like a giant Excel spreadsheet. And every time a transaction is carried out through the network, it's public. And there are some blockchains out there, such as Ethereum, where you can build applications on top of it, such as NFTs and your own ERC20 smart contract.
So could you tell us a little bit more about Ethereum? What kind of apps would we build on top of Ethereum, and why is Ethereum so different to, say, for example, Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is like digital gold. It's just there for you to put your money in it and store it over a long period of time. With Bitcoin, you can't build anything on the blockchain, but it's an original. It's the first coin out there, so it holds historical value, and it also gives an example to the other coins that come of how blockchain should work. Ethereum came after Bitcoin, and I think of it more like an electricity supply where you can code different layers on top of it. So you can code NFTs, and you code them via something called a smart contract, which is basically you code it in a language called Solidity, and you code it on top of the blockchain, and it's much more creative, and you can create DeFi applications, NFTs, and much more.
Okay, so there's a whole host of things that you can do on an Ethereum blockchain and on any blockchain other than Bitcoin, more or less. So Bitcoin is kind of the origin of blockchain, and then that's opened up a whole realm of possibilities outside of purely a peer-to-peer currency.
Yes.
Okay, so that kind of leads on to what I'd like to ask you, Imran, who is, of course, Benjamin's father. You've got quite a heavy amount of experience in technology, and as well as being a developer and being, a professional in that industry and being a specialist, you also have the wisdom of experience and the wisdom of having seen all of these changes happen. I mean, over even just the last 20 years, so much has changed. So do you think that we're likely to see more and more exponential growth in the area of blockchain?
Yeah, definitely. I think the two main features which blockchains offer is, one, they're permissionless, and two, they're censorship resistant. So it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're some crook based abroad or you're some banker based in London, you all have the same access rights to that. You don't need to seek permission from anyone, and the transactions are irreversible. I think this is the first time in history we've had that. And what that allows us to do, it allows us to separate the creation of money from the state. And that in itself has massive political and economic ramifications. It may well be that in 25 years, we look back at this period where we had to seek permission to transact. And we think that, what a regressive system that was. People in Africa, in certain countries, they couldn't buy the stocks that they wanted. They had to jump through loads of hoops around KYC. So I think at the core, this is why it's so well embraced by libertarians, because they see it as big as the separation of church and state. So they want to separate the money creation from the state, put that back into the hands of people. And what makes Bitcoin so powerful is that the monetary policy is already set in code. Anybody can go there, they can download the code, they can audit it, they can run their own node. So, and they sign up to, it's like a game of chess. When people are playing chess, you can't change the rules. So it's like people say, okay, but somebody could take Bitcoin and they could fork it and they could create a new set of rules, but you would have to get the network, which is well established now, and everybody's vested in it, to suddenly switch to a new network. And it's not going to happen. So I think at its core, it's like very, very powerful. And it seems like speculative at the moment. It's full of, gamblers, hackers, degen traders. But if you look at people like Sir Tim Berners-Lee, he is very bullish on blockchains. And I don't think he's in it for number go up technology. What he sees it is that, look, this is the internet the way it should have always worked. He views it as quite perverse that we've got 4 companies at the top: Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Google, and they've kind of monopolized the whole web. So the only way we're going to get to a state where we can have a proper decentralized internet is through blockchains, through crypto, through Web 3.0, through tokenomics, putting the power back into users' hands. They control their data, they control their private keys, they decide who accesses that data, they decide how they monetize that. So I think what we're looking at is like a 25 to 30 year trend here. And I think in 25 years, it'll look very, very different to where we are. Because I work in finance, and you hear from people that, look, it's a highly regulated industry. The startup costs are huge. You need a lot of manpower. But those arguments were made in television too, like 25 years ago. I remember we had 3 channels, BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, and how excited we were when Channel 4 came out. And people said it then that, oh, it's very, very highly regulated. You can't just go and set up your own TV channel. There's a lot of infrastructure involved. It's highly skilled, a set of people. But yeah, we've ended up in a situation, we've now got 25 million YouTubers, and they can just broadcast whatever they want. So I really think we're going to see a massive breakdown of the whole financial sector. It's going to become a lot more modular. It's going to become a lot more decentralized. The banks will still be around, like we've still got BBC ITV now, but they'll play a much more diminished role, and then they themselves will be submitting to blockchains, decentralized network, DeFi protocols. And I think the mistake what people are making is the same one that they made with the internet early on, where they thought that, look, we've got TV, we've got radio, we've got magazines, and now we've got this thing called the internet that is just another channel. But what they didn't realize, the internet was actually a platform which all the other channels were going to migrate onto. So it's the same with crypto. People think we've got bonds, we've got equities, we've got corporate loans, we've got property, a whole host of asset class. And now we've got this new asset class, which is called cryptocurrencies, but they don't realize crypto is a platform and all these other asset classes are slowly going to migrate onto that platform.
So I guess you could say in that respect that one of the main innovations of blockchain is that it brings scarcity to digital assets on the internet.
It does. It allows you to verify ownership of digital assets for the first time. It brings scarcity to something that can be digital and scarce. I mean, it takes a lot of brain power to actually, think this through, that, how is this possible and what ramifications it has. So it's introduced Bitcoin, that all comes from Bitcoin. This is why there's other blockchains there, and there's some of them are more powerful in some other way, but it's always good to go back to Bitcoin and study that from first principles, because a lot of this, like scarcity, limited supply, fixed issuance schedule, it's all been defined by Bitcoin. So I think it's the first time in history where we can verify ownership of digital assets. We can configure the scarcity and the issuance schedule. So I think on that front, we're looking at something that's going to be as big as, if not bigger than, the internet itself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, one thing that always surprises me is how Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder of Bitcoin, managed to combine such intense technical knowledge with all of the cryptography, as well as such a profound amount of economic knowledge and how scarcity works. The fact that we live in a liberal democracy, or claim to live in a liberal democracy, but all of our money, which is essentially the lifeblood of the economy, is controlled by a centralized institution. It doesn't seem to add up. So it really is fascinating, like you're saying, to always go back to basics and consider the potential implications in the future. And sorry, go on.
Yeah, because I work in finance and I work in tech, and I've got lots of finance friends that do not understand this, and I've got a lot of tech friends that do not understand this. But what they don't understand this is crypto is not finance, it's not tech, but finance and tech is a subset of crypto. So I think to truly understand what's going on, you need to understand finance, you need to understand tech, you need to understand economics, you need to understand politics, you need to understand game theory, you need to have a mind which thinks like a futurist, like, okay, so we set up a civilization on Mars, who is responsible for the monetary policy there? How will that run? Will it be a government on Earth? Will it be a new government set up there? Or hang about, or is it this decentralized currency that we've already proved works on Earth? Will that be the dominant currency on Mars? So it takes at least 5 or 6 different disciplines before you can begin to see this in a holistic way. If you just approach it as, oh, it's a financial product, you walk away thinking, okay, it's a Ponzi, it's a bubble, it's a modern version of tulips. If you approach it just from the tech front, you think, okay, it's not going to scale, it's too slow, I can get faster performance out of a SQL Server database. Why would I wait several minutes for my transactions to go through? Why is it so costly for me to write a record onto it? So you need to look at the whole holistic view of it through 4 or 5 different disciplines. And then that's when you begin to think, okay, this stuff is really world changing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, one thing that's kind of almost encouraging is that there's, like you were saying, there are so many people who currently work in finance and currently work in technology and have worked there for a long time, I assume, who still don't properly understand this. So even though that's not necessarily a good thing, it definitely shows that there's so much room to growth and that it's definitely not anything you'd consider mainstream yet. So one thing I wanted to ask you, Benjamin, is when we talk about NFTs, they're the most recent thing to have received a large amount of criticism. I mean, I remember when I was about 17, 16, people were saying that Bitcoin was a scam. And just like your father said, Bitcoin is just like tulips, it's just a bubble and all the rest of it. And now we're starting to hear that sort of rhetoric about NFTs. especially when people say, I remember I was listening on the radio the other day that someone claimed that buying an NFT was like buying a JPEG. You know, why would you buy a JPEG? Why would someone want to own a JPEG? So would you be able to, one, explain NFTs to people who have genuinely never heard of them, and then two, give a little refutation of the critics, you know, explain to the critics why, even if they might understand some of the technological aspects to it, why they're also wrong?
So there's a lot of critics about NFTs, and it's the same with, as you mentioned, Bitcoin from the start. So I'd just first like to mention that over time, people will start realizing that NFTs aren't just JPEGs. But like NFTs, once they start getting utility, then NFTs will, no one will think any bad things about them, because let's say the next Star Wars was funded through NFT. So they released an NFT collection, people then buy the NFTs, the money they made from the NFTs was used to make the film, and then the money from the film was distributed back to the token holders. Then it becomes an income stream. So people are thinking that CryptoPunk sold for millions of dollars and it's just a few pixels. Why would you do that? Well, first, it's got historical value as it was one of the first NFTs. So obviously, because it's historic, the price is obviously going to be at high versions. And second of all, this CryptoPunks marked the era of the NFTs to come, as people can see that in the future, NFTs could be everything. It could be passports, it could be movie tickets, it could be airline tickets.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand. It's that NFTs aren't just a fad, because the underlying technology behind them is a way of authorizing things like we've never been able to before. So, for example, a passport is relatively easy to forge, or I don't know, deeds to a house. I mean, the way that we do ownership of houses is very archaic. It's like, oh, I have this piece of paper, therefore I own this house. You know, someone in theory could forge a very good copy of a deed to a house and walk up to my house tomorrow and say, oh, this is mine now, and a whole legal dispute would arise. Whereas to break a blockchain down and to really override a blockchain would require an incredible amount of power and an incredible amount of money. And I think that's also something that we see in developing countries where they don't have those established legal and social systems. They don't have the same protection of personal property. So do you think that in the future we can see blockchains really helping in places like maybe, for example, South America or Africa, where historically we haven't seen the same amount of individual freedom, especially with regards to things like property ownership?
Yes, I think blockchains will definitely help developing countries, as they will move straight away from where their current position is all the way to blockchains, instead of doing what the West did, where they slowly start migrating to blockchain. So they'll skip a step of what the West has done.
It's like, it's known as technology hopping. Like in Africa now, they don't put down landlines; they just give everybody a mobile phone. And he's saying that, look, now NFTs might look okay, it might look a bit jokey, it might look a bit memey, but don't forget, one of the very first applications on Bitcoin was the Silk Road. And that was purely to transact in illicit material, drugs. And most people said, oh, I've got no need to buy that stuff, so I've got no need to buy Bitcoin. And that was actually one of the first applications that proved that, look, you can have this system out there which is permissionless, censorship resistant, and decentralized. So a lot of new technology starts off as being like very toyish, and with Bitcoin itself, it's worked its way from the bottom all the way to the top, where you've got the banks and the institutions now putting it onto their books. And the other thing, what's interesting about all of this is, one of the most powerful things about this is going to be, it's going to get every individual on earth to manage their own private and public keys. And this is something that the cypherpunks had been trying to do since the 90s, because the technology underlying this is like very, very old. So it's based on the elliptic curve, cryptography, and PGP, pretty good privacy. I mean, when it first came out, it was so powerful, the US government tried to ban it. So they said you couldn't export it because it was like exporting armaments and stuff. And even cypherpunks were saying then that, look, everybody should have a private key, they should have a public key, they should manage their own data, but they couldn't convince people to do that, because people, no matter how much we say about privacy and this, people just really don't care about it. But when money came into it, that, look, I can buy Bitcoin, the number goes up, I can trade in this stuff, everybody suddenly starts managing their own keys. And once people are into the habit of doing that, then the amount of applications you can build off the back of that is just endless.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there about people ultimately not really caring. I mean, often in the newspapers, you'll see privacy concerns, but it's only really the journalists and a handful of people that read the newspapers that actually care so much about it and will proactively do anything. And I think also when we talk about the way that people are so skeptical about whether a technology can have any applications straight away, because they'll always point to the very short-term issues. So I remember reading about Luddite horses and how people claim that horses would never be replaced by cars because, you know, we didn't have the infrastructure in place, we didn't have roads, cars needed to have mechanics and cars needed petrol and all the rest of it. And now look what's happened. You know, the only thing we use horses are for is, like, you know, the average person is definitely not going horse riding at the weekend.
Yeah, because one of the early arguments for cars was that they're more environmentally friendly because they said a horse defecated everywhere and it was bad for the environment. So it's like you said, these things take time to start getting utility. And I think we're at that inflection point now with NFTs where people are getting interested in it. It's art as a use case now, but that's just like a very, very early use case. I mean, one of the applications I came across was that because you know, deep fake news is becoming so sophisticated due to AI, they said eventually every news article and clip would be published as an NFT, because then you could trace back its authenticity to CNBC, BBC, Business Insider, Forbes, that is come from their crypto wallet.
No, that's fascinating. I've never heard that about the news articles, but it makes so much sense, especially in the era of fake news. And it actually reminds me, I believe that Louis Vuitton and a few other very big fashion brands are using blockchain now and using NFTs to verify their own clothing, because they lost hundreds of millions or maybe even billions a year to, you know, fakes I think especially in parts of Asia, people creating fakes in factories, and then, you know, that was just flooding the market and it was very difficult to distinguish between them. But now with the blockchain, they can verify these clothes as being 100% authentic.
I mean, that's another aspect of this, how you can link real world assets with digital assets as well. And then you've got purely digital assets alone. I mean, every industry we've seen, the digital version has massively outperformed the analog version. So even with this art as well, I mean, Ben, do you want to talk about the 3 categories of NFTs that you see? Because he's got this, he knows this quite well.
So when I look at NFTs, they split into 3 categories. So the first category is NFTs that people are willing to pay loads of money for. For example, these NFTs have historical value and they outline the crypto renaissance. The second group of NFTs are NFTs that turn into $1 billion brands. So they'll expand into various sectors such as gaming and merchandise. These NFTs are like Bored Apes and Cool Cats. They're highly established. The third category of NFTs are NFTs that are really cheap, lots in number, and have lots of utility. For example, in-game cosmetics. So let's say I wanted to take my weapon in Minecraft and use it in Fortnite, I can easily transfer that across. So the interoperability would be there to help.
Yeah, so like he touched on it there. So like gaming is already bigger than music and TV video combined. There's 1.5 billion gamers, and that interoperable layer does not exist at the moment. You play Fortnite, you gather a bunch of V-Bucks. As soon as you lose interest in the game, you lose all your assets. You lose your in-game currency, you lose all your skins, your cosmetics. So all of that stuff should be like NFTs. They're in your wallet. You pick up that and you go on to another game and you can suddenly deploy them assets in the other game. That is a no-brainer. That is definitely going to happen. And that is a layer that needs to be decentralized. So you can take your assets wherever you want and you can use them assets. So that is a layer that needs to be decentralized. It needs to be permissionless. It needs to be censorship resistant. Where you deploy them assets could be in a more centralized metaverse. So you might take your assets to Facebook, metaverse, and use them there. Then you might take them to like Epic Games and use them there. So it's going to be a combination of both. These centralized entities are not going to completely disappear, but they'll find that like they're having to reconfigure their business models for the web age, they're going to have to now reconfigure their business models for the blockchain age.
Yeah, that's definitely, as a very, probably more of a former very enthusiastic gamer, but definitely as someone with a lot of experience in the gaming world, I can testify to the fact that it was incredibly frustrating if you, for example, paid FIFA and maybe spent some money on FIFA points, how frustrating it would be that in a few months' time, when the next game came out, those cards would be completely useless. And the whole idea of, I mean, we hosted recently a play-to-earn game, or a developing play-to-earn game called Moonray, and the whole idea of every single games company in the world soon adopting blockchain was quite mind-blowing, and the different implications that could have for not only for the gaming industry, but also for how we see digital assets more generally. And that brings me to ask you.
And what it does is, like I mentioned before, it teaches another 1.5 billion people on Earth how to manage your public and private keys. So they're going to be a lot more interested, easier to onboard into applications which are outside gaming, whether they're DeFi based, whether they're NFT based, whether there's some new Web3 protocols, because they're going to have jumped through the hurdle of working with MetaMask, of working with ledgers, tracers.
Yeah, 100%. I think once people start to be impacted by blockchain in their own personal lives, that's when they'll start to understand things more intuitively, just like we now understand the internet for using, well, we use it every day for all sorts of different things. And that brings me to ask you, Benjamin, if you could just tell us a little bit about your Weird Whales collection and what you hope to do in the future with your skills that you've already learned.
So Weird Whales is surprisingly not my first collection. So I got interested in NFTs earlier this year and found them interesting originally as an online flex. But later I started loving the artwork, and my dad's friend bought a rare Pepe for $27,000. And I instantly became fascinated that he was willing to spend this much money on a JPEG. So I started researching. There's lots of YouTube videos out there explaining NFTs, and I researched for a few weeks and then decided I want to go all in on my first NFT project. It was just a learning experience, seeing how OpenSea and NFT marketplace worked, seeing how transferring your funds in your wallet worked. So my first collection was called Minecraft Yeehaw, which consisted of 40 small Minecraft characters, all different colors. Unfortunately, I didn't sell any of them, but I learned a lot about how OpenSea worked. I then wanted to move on to the generative aspect of this NFT space. So I reached out to someone called V from an NFT collection called Boring Bananas, and he had open sourced all the code needed to generate your images. So the script works that you put all your assets in, for example, your headgear, such as tiaras, a police cap, your bases, such as if it's an alien, a zombie, or a normal, your other accessories, and you put them into the script and you press run and they all hatch on your screen. So I reached out to V, he kindly sent me the script and I generated my Weird Whales and I showed it him and he loved it. He said they look so cool and all the traits were inspired from the famous NFT collection called CryptoPunks. So I worked on a thread, I wrote it up in a Google Doc explaining how I was able to code a smart contract at such a young age, and I posted it on Twitter expecting no response as I only had 50 followers at the time. And in a couple of hours the thread went viral people were retweeting it, quote tweeting it. People were connecting with my story because I was so young, and I was really happy that they were wanting to buy my whales, and they sold out within 9 hours. And now, after Weird Whales, I've got a large community behind me that's always helping me. I've collaborated on another NFT collection called Non-Fungible Heroes, which consists of heroes and villains and factions. And their aim is to try and produce a seasonal kind of episodes on these characters, and show that this model of having the royalties from these episodes going back to the token holders, and showing that NFTs are not just JPEGs. So their project is doing really well. They've also got a large community behind it. They sold out within 12 minutes, which was amazing. And they're doing really well, and they're constantly working on the project. And a recent project I've gotten into is with an artist called Chili. So Chili is different to other artists as she's differently abled. She's got cerebral palsy and she's deaf, but her artwork is absolutely amazing. So I wanted to try and help her digitize her artwork from the analog world to the digital world.
Okay, so it's fascinating the different things that you've already done so far, and I'm sure that in the future you'll be doing even more. But it seems quite weird almost, because usually when we ask people for advice, they're people in their 30s or 40s. But now we're going to ask you for advice in terms of how would someone who's just starting out get some exposure to crypto? What would you recommend, whether it's NFTs or just crypto more generally?
So firstly, there are loads of resources out there to learn about NFTs and crypto. For a newcomer to the space, I recommend starting just looking at Bitcoin, as its blockchain model shows the other coins to come how a blockchain should work. So study on Bitcoin first. Once you've got a good grasp on Bitcoin, you can then start looking at other coins like Ethereum, as Ethereum is more complicated because it's got smart contracts.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I'm wary of time because I know that there's you've got another call that you need to get onto, but do you have anything to add to that, Imran, before we wrap up?
No, I think that was good. How did it go for you, Ben? How did you find it?
Yeah, I think that was good. There was some interesting questions you asked.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, guys. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll do some more collaboration in the future. And in fact, for those of you who are watching, Benjamin is coming to Oxford soon to do a presentation in person on art in a digital universe, and he's going to cover all sorts of things. So if you'd like to meet one of the most impressive people in the crypto space, then make sure to come down. We'll make sure to publicize the event as well. It's not one that you want to miss. But thanks a lot, guys, for your time, and thank you for coming on to talk to us today.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.